Okay, class, today I want to introduce the idea of what I call baseline words. These are a tool that you can use to do two very important things. One, they can help you make sure that the physical placement of a sound actually matches the sound in your head. And second, it's a way to make some consistency, make sure that the same sound that you're saying over several words is all actually the same. So what is a baseline word? It's generally going to be a simple word, one syllable, sometimes two syllables. It is generally not going to include sounds that are problematic uh, between English and Mandarin or Taiwanese. And it is almost certainly going to be a word that you learned as a child. Now, why is that important? Well, when you're a child, your ears are almost perfect. You can hear everything. And then over time, all of the sounds that you've heard get filtered out, and you only keep the ones that are actually useful. But at some period in your childhood, if you heard English sounds by someone with good pronunciation or a native speaker, that sound, that word, in that context is probably quite good. Now, unfortunately, people have different experiences as children, so not everybody has the same baseline words. There are some that are pretty consistent because they're the words you might expect a child to have learned in the early readers of English. The kind of books and articles and recordings that a child would naturally hear during the formative ages. Now, does this actually work? Well, the first question is, are there actually sounds where this is true? Is there an easy way to find out whether I can pronounce one word that I learned as a child in a pretty good way, and then the same sounds in another word and have it be completely different? And the answer is yes, it happens all the time. One example I use is the word me. Most people learn this pretty early in life, and it's a pretty good word in terms of pronunciation quality. But it is very unlikely that you learned this word as a child. You learned this word when you got a job and started having meetings, right? The interesting thing is that these will sound completely different, even though this should be the same me. These two should be the same sounds. They should sound exactly the same, intonation notwithstanding. But most people will have learned this when their ears are not quite so good, and they will include or substitute Mandarin sounds. So what you'll usually hear is something more like this initially, and then because you're completely out of position, the rest of the word will end up being usually something like that. So instead of a good me, you'll end up with a, usually in Taiwan, nasalized me. So you'll hear a lot of me ting instead of a good me, which will be all in the front. Nice clean sound, keeping you in position where you should be. So how do you use these baseline words for practice? Well, the first thing is do not trust your ears in the beginning. You want to trust the physical placement of your tongue and your mouth to make the sound correctly. Being sure not to trigger your Mandarin basis of articulation. Keep the tongue and everything in the right position when you are saying your baseline word. Hold it there for a few seconds. Try not to pull out of that position. And very, very slowly, your brain will start to associate the correct sound with the nerves and muscular placement that actually produce that sound. And actually, this is precisely what you did later in life when you were saying very many words long after your ears were not so good. It's just that you ended up being in the wrong place, and so you trained the wrong position and the wrong sounds. This is one way that you can correct these. Another way to do this is to make sure that you are consistent among words, is to make a nice long sentence with words that have the same sound or same combination of sounds that you want to ensure is correct. The one that I often give for the ah sound, the baseline word that usually works for ah is cat, provided you don't cut off the voice here in a Mandarin way. You really want to keep that ah going until you hit the T, and you really want to make sure it's a K if you can and not a h. Try not to do this one, you'll be out of position. But you get that nice K in the back, you get your ah in the front, you keep the voice going, and that's usually going to be a pretty good ah. If it's not for you, as it isn't for some people who never had a cat, find a word that does work for you. Sat, nat, mat. Any of these might be okay depending on your childhood development. So what do you do with this? Well, you make a sentence. And the one I usually use is the black cat sat on the Japanese trash can. And then you can hear that all of these as are effectively the same. And the position remains the same. The vocal movements remain the same. And this is how you would practice. So what are some suggested baseline words? Well, if you're just starting out, you really want to start in the corners of your vowels here. So you've got your E here, ooh, ah, and we generally are not going to worry about this one, so just stick with your ah there. So ah, you've got your cat. E, you can use me, but if you're thinking too hard about it, you might nasalize that sound. T is usually good for people who have a more standard Mandarin basis of articulation. C will sometimes be better for those who have a more Taiwanese basis of articulation. Ah, oddly enough, this is one of those two-syllable words that works nicely. Father is usually a good one, provided, again, you do not start with the F, the Mandarin F, because you'll end up with a fa. But if you don't think about it, and that's really the key to these baseline words, don't think about it until you are in the place. Right? So if you want to make sure that your E is good, say me and hold it, but don't think about me and the position until you have said the word me. If you think about saying the word me first, you will say it in a Mandarin way. Ooh is a little more complicated because most people have actually 3 problems with this sound. So instead of one baseline word, I suggest 3 that you use together. Who, do, you. And by the time you get to the end, usually your ooh is pretty good. It has to keep that tightness in the back that you get from the y up there. And you'll be able to find baseline words for most vowels and many of the consonant-vowel combinations, or even vowel-consonant in some rare cases. So see what you can find. Go back into your childhood in your mind and see which words work nicely for you in terms of having a perfect vowel or combination set of sounds.